What's up everyone, this is Ryan here and you are watching part 3 of my Android RecyclerView tutorial. So congratulations if you've made it this far. I realized that the previous video was 2.5 hours long and that was probably quite something to get through, but I hope you see that the reason why I do such incredibly long-winded and in-depth tutorials is because as someone who sort of had to learn this stuff myself or learn it just from bits and pieces from documentation, there is a lot that tends to get left out when teaching beginners. Now, that being said, in this part of the tutorial, I will still explain everything for the most part, but there's some stuff that I'm actually not going to be doing on camera. Only a couple things. For example, I have included some unit tests for the next iteration, which we'll be building of this application. However, I'm not going to be walking you through writing the unit tests. There's just going to be little things that we're not really going to include in this part because I'm going to assume that A, you've been through part 2 and you've sort of worked through all the different examples and you're comfortable with that stuff, so I don't need to go over it again. But secondly, this is going to be directed towards sort of slightly more advanced developers. So you should be able to be caught up to speed if you get through part 2, but I'm not going to be explaining things quite the same way as I did in the previous one. We're going to be like really focusing to get this done quickly. I'm going to show you the practical stuff, and yeah, without further ado, let's just hop right into the demo. So for this part of the application, basically what I've done is I've changed up the design of the app a little bit. So as you can see, we now have a dark theme, and that includes just a couple things like setting the text to sort of an alpha white color. I downloaded some white drawables just because they look better on the dark background. And I've also made it so that the color primary dark is black, and then the color primary is sort of a nice charcoal color. Also do note that we have some circular drawables, but they're not actually circular. We're going to be using this thing called circular or circle image view to achieve this look. But basically what I wanted to show you is, let's say for example, if you were building something which has like avatars, there's a way we can set it up so that we have like circular drawables which look really nice in the recycler view. But when we actually click on it, as you see, the drawable itself is square and it animates into the full view. So that's another thing I'll be showing you is the shared element transitions, which are super fun to figure out. Just notice that when I hit back, this drawable will get scaled down, and same with the text, it will get included back into the recycler view, just like that. And there's a couple other things that I've added to the application. So we now have a plus button, so obviously that adds items to the recycler view. So I'll hit the plus now. And I want you to notice that it does fling the recycler view down to the bottom of the list. I'll show you how to do that. And this is our new item. Other than some dividers, which I'll show you how to do really quickly, that's an easy thing to add in. I've included deletion, swipe to delete, as well as an undo feature. Now the undo is a little bit tricky, so that's something I'll be talking quite a bit about. But basically how it works is if I swipe to delete an item here, you'll notice the recycler view sort of animates it away. And also there was a toast that popped up in order to undo the action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe to delete this item here. I'm going to scroll up a little bit and then I'll hit the undo button, and hopefully what we'll see is that the recycler view shoots down and reanimates the previously deleted item back into view. So that looks like this. And as you can see, it's added it back in. So that's basically it. This is the application that we'll be building. I won't make too many hints, but there's a pretty good chance that we'll be adding a lot more to this application in the coming weeks. More to do with working with background services, databases, and things of that nature, but I'll talk about that later. Without further ado, we're going to jump into the coding. If you appreciate this content and you like what I do, please do me a favor and hit the like button down below. And also consider checking out the pinned comment in the comment section for more options to support my efforts should you feel like that's something you'd like to do. And if not, that's fine too. Thank you so much, and yeah, let's get some coding done. Alright, to kick things off, we are just going to mess with some global settings for colors to sort of redefine our entire color scheme, which is actually a really easy and interesting process, because by changing just a couple different XML resources, we can sort of make our app look totally different. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from the previous part, which was to sort of show how if you define these things in a certain way, you can make enormous changes that propagate across the application, instead of like settings, just being kind of silly about your styles and setting them in the XML layouts all the time and things of that nature. We want to do stuff where we change one thing that propagates global changes to the rest of the application. And also we're going to add some stuff to build.gradle. So let's dive right in. It's going to get really technical. We're going to open up colors.xml, prepare yourself, and all we are going to do is I'm just going to add two new colors. So we're going to call the first one color name equals color transparent background, or no, transparent black rather. And so basically how this kind of works, I'm just going to copy a comment over. If we wish to define a color which has sort of a predefined alpha value, and alpha is sort of another way of saying how transparent something is, we can basically include a hex equivalent to, say, for example, a percentage as the first two pairs. Well, let me just type it out instead of talking about it, and you'll see what I mean there. So for the first two of this sort of hex color, we're going to type 52, which is the hex equivalent for 32%. I figured out that just by Googling it, hex to percentage, and then you can find tables online to figure that out. And then we'll just include the regular hex value for the color, which for black is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. I'm going to click here, hit Control D, and then we're going to do this for white as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So why would I bother with this alpha? Well, as we'll kind of see in a moment, sometimes your sort of colors will look a little bit nicer when they're softer. Sometimes you want them to be sort of hard values or totally 100% opaque. It really just kind of depends on what you're looking for, but yeah, that's basically it. So the next thing we'll be doing is I am, of course, going to be setting up the color schemes to look more like the demo that I showed you before. So for color primary, this is going to become charcoal gray, which is 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then for color primary dark, that is just going to be black. There we go. And color accent is totally fine how it is. I really like that light blue color. It's super versatile. It's going to work just fine. The only other thing we will change is color window background, which is also going to be that charcoal color. And that is basically it for colors.xml. The next thing we'll do is open up build.gradle. So instead of opening up the project explorer and that stuff, what I'm going to type is Control, this is on Windows, Control-Shift-N, and we're going to type build.gradle. And it's slower when I'm explaining it to you like this, but when you get used to using Control-Shift-N to open up any file in your project, or Control-N to navigate between the classes in your project, you'll find that you move quite a bit quicker a lot of the time. And I'm going to open up the app level build.gradle file. I'm also going to double check to see that I am recording, and I am still recording. That's a nice thing. And let's see here. So what we're going to add now, let me just make sure I get everything correct here. So it looks like we're going to be adding the design library. And I'm just going to copy and paste this over. I don't think there's any value in me typing all this stuff out. So we're going to add the support design library. And then I'm also going to add a third-party library, which is the circle image view library. So one thing that I kind of find kind of funny, and also props to Mr. I believe it's Henning Dodenhoff, and you can find this repository here. I'd suggest you go check it out and you know, give him some love. Thank you for this simple but useful library. Now you might be wondering, why do we need a circle image view library? Well, this is kind of a funny thing, but oddly enough, it's actually somewhat difficult to get the effect of having sort of circular image views There's different ways you could kind of go about solving the issue, but after fiddling around with it for like 2 hours, I finally just accepted the fact that the quickest and easiest thing to do for both me and you is to just use this library. You might also be able to use the floating action button, but we'll kind of see what I mean later on. The effect I'm trying to get is to have sort of images which can be of any shape. They could be square, they could be circle, but of course in the avatar of the recycler view, I want them to be circular. So that's why we kind of need to use this image view library here. Alright, so I've gone ahead and done a Gradle sync, and we're ready to continue. So what I've done is I've gone to the material.io/icons URL, and I've picked up a couple more drawables which we'll be using for the application. I know not many people can see them very well here, but basically I've got this thing called IC add black, which is just a plus symbol. And I've also taken the event drawable and grabbed a white version. The reason why I grabbed the white version is because it will look better on the black background or the dark background. And then I've also added another drawable, which will basically be like a top. It's just like a little icon in the toolbar kind of thing, not particularly useful, but I thought I would include it anyway. I will include these files in the repository, or you can go to, as I say, material.io/icons, which will give you all the icons you could really ever dream about. So the next thing we'll do is I'm going to add a couple of sort of custom drawables to the application. And so what these will do is they'll basically kind of simulate drawables we might want to display in a regular application. But since they'll be drawables which we create through XML, then they'll just be a little bit easier to add and manage and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on here and go to New, and we're going to go to Directory, and we're going to call this directory Drawable. And then I'm going to right click in the Drawable directory, and we're going to make a drawable resource. And this file is going to be called blue drawable. And for the root element, it's going to be shape. And yes, let's add that to Git. And so basically what this does is it's going to allow us to sort of, well, it's going to allow us to draw a blue rectangle, and that will kind of simulate a drawable that we'd like to load. So maybe something we download from the internet or something like that. So all we really need to do here is in the shape tag, we're going to add an attribute, which is the shape of the drawable, which will be a rectangle. Then we're going to type solid Android color, and for color we're just going to type blue, and that will create sort of a solid shape for us. And then for the size of this drawable, we are going to set it to, for width 500 dip, and for height 500 dip as well. And this will become our blue drawable. I'm going to go ahead and close that tag because it's screaming at me. And all we're going to do now is I'm basically just going to copy and paste this thing a couple times, and we'll do it for the rest of the colors that we have. So I'm going to hit Control C on it, hit Control V, and we're going to call this one green drawable. And let's see what green is. Red, yellow. So green is going to be, I like how I went to check and see what the hexadecimal for green was, and then I shortly thereafter remembered that we've made resources out of it, so I can just literally type green. Oh, my brain works in funny ways sometimes. Let's go ahead and do that for yellow as well. And we'll do, oops, and the last thing we'll do is, one more time, we'll do it for red. And we'll see where we end up using these drawables later on. So those are the drawables which we'll be using. Why is this one not showing up properly? I'm a little bit wary now. Okay, well, it's not giving me a preview, but I don't actually see anything wrong. So we're going to assume that this is okay, but I just don't like it when it does that kind of thing. Anyways, whatever, we're just gonna have to deal with it. The next thing that we'll do is I'm gonna make one more custom drawable. And so we're going to right click again on the drawable. We're gonna go to drawable resource. Actually, let me just open it up on the other side here, just so I know what the root is. And we'll go new drawable resource, and we're gonna call this one div white, or let's just call it, let's say, divider white. And the root again will be a shape. And for this one, we're just going to say, I don't necessarily know if it even has to be the shape tag, but whatever, it works. Android height, for height we're gonna do 1 dip, and then we're just gonna do like a solid line, so that's going to be Android color, and we're going to select our color transparent white. And that will become the divider between our RecyclerView items. And that is all we need to do for our drawables. Of course, you will have to go and download these ones before you can proceed, but that's basically it. All right, so 2 things before we continue with the layouts. Number 1, if you would like to play with the color scheme, change the layouts, use different drawables, kind of mess around with the user interface how you see fit, I would strongly encourage that. Basically what that does is when you work with this stuff and you kind of make it your own, it sort of gives extra sort of space and bandwidth for your brain to kind of work with the information and make it its own and make it relevant to you, which is really important. Or you can just follow along with what I do as well, that's fine too. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm going to do things a little bit differently with these layouts. I'm going to assume that we're all very tired of seeing Ryan fumble and write these XML layouts line by line. There's not really anything new here, so I am just going to be copy and pasting the layouts in. I would suggest you do the same. Open up the completed version repository and just copy and paste this code over. I will be talking about the changes that I make, but I'm not going to be typing the whole thing out. I think we've seen enough of that. And at this point, we're at stage 3 of the RecyclerView, so it's time to put on the daddy pants and get some work done quickly. So what we're going to do is I forgot to make one change in styles.xml. So all you need to do is we've reset the color scheme, but as you can see here, our text is dark on a dark background, and that's pretty hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to delete light dot. And what that's going to do is it's going to basically say to our, it's going to set the theme to something that has a dark background with light text, and it does all the work for us by just specifying that it's no longer a light theme. And if I hop back to item data and it's actually loaded properly, we have white text now, which looks a lot nicer. So what we're going to do is let's open up the text viewer here. And like I say, we're just going to be copy and pasting a lot of this stuff because, yeah, I think I already explained why. So what I've done is we've kept the same constraint layout, not a huge amount of changes that way, but one thing we have changed is I've added a circle image view for the avatar. And I explained earlier why I did that. Basically, it's just kind of the easiest way to set up a circular image view. And what we're going to do is, just to give you kind of a visual preview, I'm going to type Android source. Actually, I'm going to type tools source rather. And tools are design time attributes, which get stripped out when the application gets compiled, but they're kind of nice to do a preview. And we're going to go blue drawable just as a preview. And we'll get rid of that progress bar in a moment to see what that looks like. So that part's optional. Just note that I did add a little bit of an alpha to it just to take some of the sharpness away from the image and make it a little softer. Other than that, not a lot of changes. I've set it to the white drawable, of course, because it looks better on the dark background, and the text view is basically the same. I've also added this progress bar. Now, the thing about the progress bar is that because our data loads instantly, we're probably never going to see this progress bar in action in the actual view, but we might see it in action later on when I start adding other stuff to the application such as an actual database, but we'll talk about that later. But just to give you a visual preview, I'm just going to hit Control X, and this is what our list item looks like now. So as you can see, we've got a sort of opaque white text on here with a little bit of alpha, and we've got our drawable IC event, and then we've got our nice little avatar, and that is what list item is going to look like now. I'm just going to go ahead and put that back in, and we will get rid of item data for now and move on to activity list. For activity list, again, I'm just going to copy and paste it in. So what I've added is I've added a toolbar to the top of the layout, and that's really just for visual appeal. It's not really going to do anything in this iteration of the application, but I thought I would throw it in because it looks kind of nice. And we'll see how to set the icon and the text in Java as opposed to doing it in the XML here. I've also added a floating action button, which you can see down here. And I've made sure to position it sort of outside of the way of the snack bar, which will pop up for the undo feature. Now, one thing you can kind of do, which might look a little bit better, is you could set this to a, what's it called, coordinator layout, and then sort of wire it up with the floating action button and stuff like that, so that the floating action button will kind of get pushed up as the snack bar pops up. I just really didn't feel like bothering with that, but if you're curious about it, how to sort of set that way that the floating action button reacts to something like a snack bar, you would do that through a coordinator layout. That's basically it. We've got our floating action button, we've got our toolbar, and no significant to the changes to the recycler view, except it is bound to the bottom of the toolbar. That's basically it for activity list. Let's hop into activity detail now. And for activity detail, what we're going to do is I'm going to, again, just copy and paste all that crap in. And there's a couple things that I'm actually going to delete for now, these transition names. We're going to talk about those later, but those have to do with transitions. But we'll cover that when we actually get to that part. So that's basically it. As you can see, the only thing I kind of added proper was just this kind of div center thing. And actually, no, sorry, I didn't add that. All I really did was change the this thing to have sort of a dark background, which we'll see looks kind of nice with the colored images. And yeah, that's basically it for the layout stuff. So yeah, what we'll do next is we're going to start integrating some features that we've now added as visual elements, like for example the floating action button, and we'll see how to wire those up with the rest of the application. So of the various little programmatic changes that you can make with the recycler view, the easiest one is to add dividers between the different items in the recycler view. So we are going to do that now. It's going to be real quick for this one. So all we really need to do is I'm actually going to pull this layout manager out as an instance variable. So I'm going to say linear layout manager equals that. We're going to pass that back into the recycler view, of course, because it kind of needs it. And we're going to do a couple changes here. So what I'm going to add is this divider item decoration class. And we're going to say equals new. And for the parameters, what we're going to pass is, for starters, RecyclerView.getContext for the first parameter, and for the second parameter, we are going to pass in our layout manager, and we're going to say .getOrientation, and that is that. And then of course we need to set the drawable of this item decoration, so I'm going to type item decoration, zoom in a little bit here so you can see that a little bit better. Item decoration dot set drawable, and for that we are going to say context compat, which is handy to use when you need to get system resources. Get drawable, and of course for context compat we need to include context, activity context. I'm going to type list activity.this just so we're not confusing this with anything else, and it shouldn't really be an issue, but just for ambiguity's sake, if nothing else. And then we're also going to pass our drawable that we created. So that's going to be r.drawable.divider white. And the last thing we need to add in here is we're going to say RecyclerView.add item decoration. And we're going to add in item decoration. And that is it to add dividers to our RecyclerView. There's other things you can do with the item decoration. I would suggest you check out the documentation to get some more ideas. Also, we'll be using other parts of the RecyclerView.item decoration tools and things of that nature later on. So yep, that's all you need to do to add dividers to your RecyclerView items. All right, so what we're going to be doing now is setting up our functionality to add a single item to the RecyclerView by way of clicking on the floating action button. Now we're going to kind of set this up in a way similar to if we were talking to a real database. And the reason for that is, you know, whether you're talking to a fake database or a real one, you should really be talking to it in the same way. That way you can swap them out when it comes time for testing and production. But that's a big long rant that I've been over a couple times, so I'll leave that for now. But yeah, just one really quick thing to mention. I did actually write the unit tests before writing the implementation, which I'll be showing you here. I do actually practice test-driven development. Now, I'm not going to be writing the unit tests here. I have included them in the source code, but it's just an extra step that we don't really need to bother with at this moment, because at this point I'm going to assume that really by this point you just want to know how to add cool things and make the RecyclerView function better. So we're going to sort of approach it from that perspective, but if you'd really like to go above and beyond, then I would suggest writing the unit test yourself. And without further ado, let's jump in here. So we're of course going to need to add, we're in list activity, and we're going to say floating action button, and I always call them fabulous, I don't know why, but floating action button fabulous equals, oh come on, there we go, floating action button find view by id r.id.fab create new item, and we are going to add an onClick listener to it, of course. So we're going to say fabulous.set onClick listener, and we're going to pass this. And in order to make that work, we are going to make our activity implement view.onClickListener. Of course, I'm going to, once it goes all red, I'm going to type Alt-Enter, implement methods, onClick, and that sets up our onClick listener there. And let's see, so what we need to do at this point is, since I've set up kind of a general onClick listener that applies to the whole activity, because I might be adding stuff later on, I don't really know, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the view ID before calling the appropriate method. So what that means in code is I'm going to say int view ID equals v.getID. And that's of course going to get the ID of the view that was clicked. And we're going to type if view ID equals r.id. If it equals our floating action button, then we are going to say user wishes to create a new RecyclerView item. And in order to do that, we need to create a new method in our controller, and that method is going to be controller. Then we're going to type .create new list item. Now again, this is stuff I would have figured out during the testing, sort of unit test writing phase, but we're kind of skipping that part for brevity's sake. So obviously we haven't created that yet, so I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, create method. That's going to hop over to controller, and we're going to get that method set up now. And so that is create new list item. I'm going to copy and paste a little note over here. And then what we're going to type is we are going to type list item new item equals data source dot create new list list item. So again, we haven't actually created this yet. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to hop into the data source interface, and we're going to create that method in there. And what that looks like is list item, create new list item. So basically what we're doing here is we're kind of simulating talking to a real database, but we're cutting corners a little bit. In most cases, when you're working with a real database, you're not going to be able to just say list item new item equals, hey, get me this item instantly. In most cases, you will be talking to a database or a web service asynchronously. I'm not going to go into great detail on that, but basically what asynchronous means is that you would kind of attach a listener to the method that you're calling, or you might use RxJava or something like that. Because when you're talking to a real database or a real service, you should not expect it to respond instantly. Like, for example, if you're talking to a web service and you have crappy internet, it's obviously going to take longer to get the data, or if you have no connection, you might not get any data. But just to, just a quick heads up on that. We'll see how to do that in other applications later on. So all we've done is we've added this create new list item method. And what we'll do with that item is we're going to say view dot add new list item to view. Ryan with his long and descriptive names. And of course, we're going to pass in that list item. And naturally, we'll need to add this method to the view as well. And let me just make sure that looks correct, and view, and that is what it should look like. So we've added that into our view, and then what we need to do is hop back into the list activity. It's going to say, hey, we're missing that method you just added, so I'm going to hit again, Alt Enter, implement methods, blah, 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 add the new method in. Let's hop back over to list activity, and where is this? So what we need to do at this point is we're just going to say, list of data dot add list item. Not list of data. We're not going to add the list of data to our list of data. We're going to add new item. Looks like I called it something different in the other one, and I'm confusing myself already, which doesn't take a lot at the best of times. All right, so we've added it to our list. We've added a new item to our underlying data source, or sorry, data set. It's changed. However, that's not the only thing that we need to do, because we also need to tell our adapter that the underlying data set has changed, and that way it can sort of react to those changes. So how we can do that is we can just type adapter.notify item inserted, notify item inserted, and we can provide it with the position. Now, where was it inserted? How can we figure that out? Well, easiest way to do that I could think of is just by typing int end of list equals list of data dot size -1. And of course, because for some reason programmers decided that starting to count at 0 was a good idea for the index of arrays and so forth, what this will work out to is we'll basically say it'll always be at the end of the list. So what we can do is adapter.notify item inserted end of list. And then one last little extra thing we're going to do, and this is just for visual appeal, is we're going to tell our RecyclerView, once we add this item, it's kind of nice for the user to know that that has occurred. So we're going to type RecyclerView dot smooth scroll to position end of list, and that's going to sort of scroll our RecyclerView down when we wish it to. So yeah, that should basically be it for adding a new RecyclerView item. And as usual, I've totally forgotten to add something, so we're going to implement that method in the data source itself, which we added to the interface, which is the create new list item. And what we're going to do there is, again, just kind of type implement methods. We'll add that thing in, and we're going to mess around a little bit in here because we actually need to make some changes to fake data source, and we might as well get those out of the way now that I've remembered. Otherwise, I'll forget again later. So really the only changes that I'm going to make is I'm going to say, we're going to pull this random variable into a member variable or instance variable. I don't know. There's all these random little names that I don't really remember very well. We're going to make a variable out of it. And dates and time, that's fine. Messages is fine, but we are going to change this thing here. So I'm going to double click on that, hit Shift F6, and we're going to rename this to Drawables, since they're no longer just colors. And then what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to copy and paste this over really quickly, and we're just going to supply our 4 drawables that we created. Nothing super fancy going on there. And yep, that's basically that. We're also going to initialize our random variable here. So we're going to say equals new random, and we'll see why we did that in just a moment. So we've got our getListData method, and we're going to do something kind of interesting. So this is just a very slight point, but whenever you, well, how I initially did this is I said to myself, well, I'm going to take this code. I just want this method to return a single new list item, just like that. And then I could have just said return list item and kind of just left it. Come on now, list item. There we go. I could have just said return list item, and that would be that. But after I did that, I realized, hey, I have exactly the same code duplicated in 2 places, which generally speaking, when you see something like that, that's usually a hint that you can do a little bit of optimization. So instead of leaving this as it is, I'm going to clean up this method quite a bit. Just going to delete all of that, and I'm going to type for blah blah blah, we're going to say .add create new list item. And so it'll still create a random list of 12 items, except in this case we're using this method here as kind of a helper method. And so whether we just want one item from our fake data source, or we want to create the entire list up here, either way, we're just calling this method. Our code's a little bit cleaner, and those are the kind of nitpicky little things that I personally find are worth being nitpicky about. Because, hey, we're all about being a good developer and writing good code as much as possible. So with that, we should have our data source set up properly. One other little thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the detail activity. And excuse me. So since we have changed from drawables, colors to drawables, I'm just going to actually rename this to extra drawable, just so it's less ambiguous. And let's see down here. So this has actually become IMV colored background. And we're not going to say set background color, but rather we are, of course, going to say set background resource. And then we are going to say drawable resource extra, which we need to write up here. So instead of saying int color resource extra, we're going to say, why don't you use Shift F6 and be a good programmer, Ryan? There we go. Drawable resource extra. Do as I say, not as I do. And yep. And then we can just pass that right in here. So we're going to say drawable resource extra. And I believe that's all we need to do in here. And so that'll just make it so that when we go to our detailed view, we're setting a color and not getting, or we're setting a drawable, not a color drawable confusing error thing. It would have caused errors in a nutshell. And the only other thing I'll do is I'm just going to make sure that we renamed the tag in list activity, which was not what occurred. So we're going to, again, just type extra drawable and rename all the things. So hopefully that didn't cause any major errors. What that should do for us is sort of avoid the same error that I had last time where I had the wrong key. So that's basically everything you should need to do, hopefully for real this time, to be able to add items to your recycler view. Now this will be pretty much the most complicated thing that we do today. So just bear in mind that we're going to be jumping around quite a bit. I'm going to be adding things here and there. The most important thing I want you to know is that I did actually use test-driven development to write this stuff, and I actually kind of needed to, because as we'll see, swiping to delete and having the option to undo that action is actually a little bit complicated. So my suggestion is, if you really want to go and learn this stuff deeply, you'll probably want to try and write some unit tests yourself. In this case, like I say, I've included the unit tests in the source code so you can use them to guide what's going on. We're going to be bouncing around to different places here because this is a little bit more of an involved process than the other things, but not super complicated. Stick with me and we will work it out. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up our item touch helper, which is the thing that we use to kind of set up the swipe to delete functionality and also to respond to it when it occurs. So in order to do that, we're just going to say item touch helper equals new item touch helper. And so what we're going to do is, instead of having like an anonymous callback and all that crap right here, we're going to say, let's create a method, create helper callback. And as you can see in the parameters that are popping up, this thing requires a callback to be passed in as a parameter. And also we're going to, while we're here, say item touch helper dot attach to RecyclerView, and we'll pass in our RecyclerView, of course. And now what we'll do is create this method. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and not within the adapter brackets here, but just within the class, of course, the activity class. We're going to type out this big long method here. So it's going to be private item touch helper.callback, create helper callback. And I am going to copy and paste this in, but I will explain it in detail. So this is basically how we set up the callback and how we sort of get our item touch helper working properly. So how this basically works is there's a couple different callbacks you can use. I'm using simple callback because it's simple to use. In this application, we're not actually going to be able to rearrange items vertically. However, if you wish to do that, I'll mention right here how you can. When we create this item touch helper callback, there's basically two parameters that we can supply, but in a way we can supply four technically. But the first parameter basically is how you tell the item touch helper if you want to be able to move things vertically, or basically move things up or down and rearrange them in the data set. So let's say, for example, if you wanted to move things up, you could say item touch helper dot up. If you wanted to restrict it specifically to only going up, or you could say down, or you could do the same thing as down below here, supply two of them. If you want to just restrict it entirely, which is what I want to do, you're going to hit 0. And what that means is that we don't need to bother about this method here, onMove, which is the method that would be called when someone sort of moves the thing around. And yeah, that's basically all I'll say about that. And but we do want the user to be able to swipe left or right. I don't really care. They're able to swipe it. And what that will do is, when the item gets swiped, it's going to fire this method here, onSwiped. OnSwiped will supply us with the view holder which was swiped, and also the direction. We don't really care about the direction in this case, but what we can do is we can say, let's get the position of the view holder which was swiped, and also the data associated with that position down here. And we're just going to pass that stuff into the controller, because the view, which is our activity, should not be concerned with making decisions about this stuff. It's just going to forward this input to the controller. What we'll do next is we will create that method in the controller. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, create method. That's going to pop us over to the controller. And let's get to work. This is going to be a fairly involved process here. So what we're going to do, the first thing we need to do is ensure that the view and data layers have consistent state. Now, the thing that's kind of going on here is while I'm trying to make this as close as possible to talking to a real service, the thing about it is it's still a demo app, and we're going to kind of cheat a little bit, but the principle is here, and the principle is that we want to make sure, we want to avoid situations where our view state is inconsistent with the state of our data. That is a really bad scenario to be in because it can lead to situations which will mess up your application's functionality, but won't always have like application crash errors. You'll just get really weird situations where records aren't created or updated or deleted properly. So the whole point is let's try and make it so that our view is consistent with our data as much as possible. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say data source.delete list item. We're going to pass in swiped item. Now obviously, or sorry, that's going to be list item. Now obviously our fake database isn't actually going to be deleting anything, but I want that method in there again to simulate talking to a real data source. And we're going to go ahead and add that in here. So that's going to be void, what was that? I already forgot. Delete list item. And we can pass in the list item here. And we can make our data source implement that, but it's actually not really, we don't need to write any implementation, so to speak. Just leave it blank. So that's the first thing. We also need to tell the view to make its state consistent. So we're going to say view.delete list item at, and we're going to supply position. Again, I'm going to hit Alt Enter, and we're going to go create that and delete list item at, and it has created it in our data source perfectly. That's awesome. And what we'll do now is we're going to go to list activity. We've got that set up. Let's add in these things that we just needed to add here. So I'm going to hit Alt Enter, implement methods, delete list item at. And for this, all we are going to say is, what are we going to say? Delete list item at. And then what we're going to do is say list of data dot remove position, just like that. And we're going to say adapter dot notify item inserted and position. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, well, we've swiped the item, and we've seen that it was deleted from the data source. Let's make sure that this list of data is consistent with that, so we remove it from this list of data. And we are also going to tell the adapter, hey, this thing got deleted, you need to be aware of that. So that's basically what we need to do there. Okay, so we've got that added in, and I totally forgot to add brackets there. So let's fix that. So we've set it up so that our RecyclerView can delete items now, basically. However, in most cases, if you want to be nice to your users, you're going to want to give them some way of undoing these deletion operations. And one thing which has happened from time to time with RecyclerViews in my experience is sometimes they'll get a little bit spazzy and delete when even I don't really want them to, and I'm someone who writes these applications. So I think in general you want to add some way that the user can undo things. So I will show you one way to do that now. Now, like I say, this is a little bit, it's a fairly involved process here. It takes some thought. So let's hop back into the controller. So we've got this list item, we've got our data consistent with our view. That's all fine and dandy, but there's a couple things we need to add in here. So where's my method? Totally looking in the wrong class. On list item swiped. So what we're going to do is, and you know, this is kind of, it's not the easiest problem to solve. There's different ways you could go about solving this, but I will show you kind of a quick way that we can deal with this situation, which kind of does require the controller having state, which I don't really like, but for the purposes of this demo application, I think it'll at least point you in the right direction. So what we're going to do within the controller is we're going to create two new variables. One of them is going to be a list item called temporary list item. And the other one is going to be an int called temporary list item position. And what we'll do is we'll see what those do in a moment, but so once an item is swiped, we want to set our temporary variables. So we're going to say temporary list item position equals position, and temporary list item, of course, equals list item. But we're not done yet, because we also need to say to the view, hey, we better show a snack bar, show undo snack bar. And I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, and let's add that to the interface, of course. And then we'll head back into the activity, and we'll add that method as well. And so we've got it down here. And the snack bar is a handy thing. I really love it, and I like that they created it. So what we can do now is we're going to type snackbar.make, and there's a lot of different parameters we have to add to this thing. So for starters, we're going to say find view by ID, and we're going to supply the root view of the activity, which is where we would like the snack bar to show up in. And what we'll do is we'll say r.id.rootListActivity. For the next parameter, we're going to supply a string. So this is like the message. If I hit Control P, the well, it doesn't. It just says text, but the little message within the snack bar. I keep wanting to say toast because they are slightly similar, but of course snack bar is more complicated than a toast. So we'll say r.string.action delete item. Then I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, create string value, and we're just going to say item deleted. So we're saying to the user, hey, this thing got deleted. So that's the first thing. And then what we'll do is we're going to say snack bar, and this is the length that the snack bar shows up, similar to like a toast, which is part of the reason I always confuse them. And we're just going to say snack bar.length long. So we've created the snack bar, but we need to do a couple more things. We need to chain a couple methods to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say .set action. And for action, we're going to say, and action is really just a button. We're saying set button. And the button I want is going to say r.string.action undo. And that's just going to be uppercase undo with a question mark. I guess I don't really need to add the question mark, but that's totally fine. And then to this button, we are going to add an on-click listener. So I'm just going to say new view.onClick listener, Alt-Enter, enter, 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 enter. Add that in here. Now, what we want to do is when the user presses this undo button, we are going to tell the controller, as always, we're going to say, hey, controller, the user said on undo. So we're going to type on undo confirmed. Confirmed. There we go. And we'll add that in a moment. While we're here, we're also going to add another thing to this. And what we'll do is at the end of, again, we'll add another chained method call. And we're going to say .add callback. And this is kind of an interesting thing. Let's add it and then I'll talk about it. So new base, and this is a mouthful, transient bottom bar callback. And I only want on dismissed highlighted here. That's all I need. And so this is a big fancy way of saying, okay, when the snack bar disappears, we're going to say to the controller, hey, the snack bar's gone. There's literally no way the user can undo the action. We're going to assume they're okay with the thing being deleted. And so we're going to add another method to the controller, which is on snack bar timeout. So as you can see, this is kind of why it's complicated, is there's a couple different things that could happen. The user could hit undo, they could do nothing, and we need to be able to respond to each of those different potential use cases. So that's really all we need to add here. The only other thing is, of course, we want it to show up, so we're going to type .show. And that is all we need to add in this snack bar area. I'm just going to add both of these methods to the controller, then we'll jump in and create it. So yep, got that there, and then I'll add this one too. All right, so we've first got on undo confirmed. So what we're going to do is when we've confirmed that the user has decided that they don't actually want to delete whatever they deleted, what we're going to do is we are going to kind of do a null check just to be safe. And we're going to say temporary list item. If it does not equal null, then we can do some stuff. Otherwise, well, we could show an error message or something like that, but we're basically just going to leave that blank. And then what we'll do now is, again, to ensure view/data consistency, we will start by saying to the data source, hey, you need to add a record, insert a record back into your shit. Pardon my language. My working class explanations. Insert list item, temporary list item. And again, we're going to add this into the data source, but we don't actually have to handle it for realsies. So we'll just add this in here so that the warning goes away. And yeah, we can leave that be. Cool, so we've got our data set up properly, but we also, of course, need to make our view consistent with the data now. So we're going to say .insert list item at, and we're going to supply temporary list item position and the temporary list item. Now, once we've done that, of course, now we've had our records inserted back into the stuff, and that's all fine and dandy. So I will now say we'll assign list item to null, just so we're not holding on to state when we don't need to be. And we're also going to say to the position equals 0, because it's an integer. We're not going to set it to null. We'll just set it to 0. And then we can set up this method. Before we go out of the controller, though, let's just copy and paste this down in here. All we're going to do when the snack bar times out is we're just going to say, all right, let's let go of the data. It's done. Let it go. Move on. You can tell I'm tired when I start getting more giggly and ADHD. So we've got view.insert list item at. Is that correctly spelled? Yes, it is. Let's hit Alt-Enter. Create method. Blah, blah, blah. Do all the things. Hop back over to list activity, and this should be the last thing that we need to add in here. Insert list item at. And when we want to insert an item, all we do is we say let's just rename that to position. Not really any need for those long ass names now. Cool. Okay, so we've done that, and we're going to say list of data dot add. So we're going to add the item back into our data set at the specified position, and that's the data. And then, of course, we always want to make sure we tell the adapter what's what. So we're going to say notify data. What is it? Notify item inserted and at position. So yeah, that's basically all we need to do for the swipe to delete functionality and the undo functionality. The only thing we have left is our transitions, which we'll do next, unless I've screwed something up, in which case you will see me right now. All right, we're almost there. All we need to do now is add our transitions. Shared element transitions to be specific. So what we'll do is hop in, and so one thing about the transition animations that I used, they're only available in APIs 21 or higher. So we're going to sort of need to set that up in our project. So I'm going to right click on the res directory, go to new Android resource file. We're going to call it styles.xml, and we're going to head down to the version qualifier, and then we're going to say 21. That will create our styles v21. I'm going to kind of do this quickly and just carbon copy our app theme here and slap it in here. except we're going to add one more attribute to it if I can get this thing to fit on the screen. And that is going to be, totally already forgot what it was. And that's going to be item window content transitions, just like that. And we're going to set that to true just to enable them. So we can't do this on any API lower than 21. So that's not the only thing we need to do. We also need to kind of set up some transition names in our activity detail. So basically what these transition names do is they'll help our animation stuff know what is getting animated to where, and also it'll help when we want to animate things back when the user hits the back button, for example. And the way that we can set these things up is to add some transition names. So we're going to type, Android transition name equals, and then let's open up strings.xml, and I'm actually just going to copy and paste these in. And the things that we need to add are some transition names here. So these are just arbitrarily defined things. I've called one drawable, one message, one date. They're really just unique identifiers. You don't need to overthink them. And in transition name for this first one here, we are going to type transition drawable. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that for the other item, or the other things that we're transitioning to. So this is, of course, the date and time label. So transition time and date is fine. And for this one is the message. So that's going to be transition message. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-L, clean things up a little bit. And that's all we need to do in the XML. So we've got these things set up. We've got tags, and we'll see how those kind of help us later on. The next thing we need to do is open up listActivity.xml once again. And this is where things are going to get a little bit interesting. So when we go to fire the next activity, which occurs when someone clicks on a particular item in the recycler view, that's when we can kind of get our animations working. Now the thing is, obviously we can only do this on API 21 or higher, so we need to add that as sort of a control statement. So I'm going to type if build.version.sdkint is greater than or equal to build.versioncodes.lollipop, then we can go ahead with our animations. So we're saying if the device, the current device that's being used, is running API version equal to or higher than lollipop or 21, we're good to go. And once we've done that check, we're also going to add else. Don't technically need to, but yeah. And cool. So in here, we're going to do a couple different things. Now we need to say get window dot set enter transition, and we're just going to use kind of some basic transitions here. Fade, and we're going to want to say fade dot in. We're going to keep these things pretty sort of straightforward and simple. I'm not going to do any amazing animation stuff. We're just going to kind of get this working and show you how to get it work. Oh, love it when that happens. There's my entire thing there. Okay, so we're going to say we've set our transitions that we wish to use, which is just simple fade transitions. Now, before we can proceed, there's actually a change we need to make in the controller and how it responds to these transitions. So let me just figure out what we need to do here. So let's scroll down to our onClick. And so what we're going to do is we kind of need to get a hook to the view root of the RecyclerView item. It's going to make more sense when I type it out versus talking about it, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to hit comma, and we're going to pass the view in onClick itself up into the controller. And of course, we'll set our controller up so that it receives that properly. And that is going to be in onListItemClick, which is up at the top. And we're going to say view view root just there. And all we really need to do is just then pass that as another parameter down here. So we're just going to say item, or we're just going to say view root there. And then we'll update that, of course, in the view interface. So let's go ahead and open that up, view interface. And we will add in, should be start detail activity. We're going to say view, that was view root, I believe. Yep. And then we go into list activity and scroll way the hell up here. Wow, this is getting to be a decent sized application. And then we're going to say view root. All right, so we're passing in our view root, and we will now see why that is important and why it's something that we need to do. So let's navigate back up here, getting a workout on the mouse wheel here, the scroll wheel. And so what we need to do now is we need to say activity options equals activity options dot, we're going to say make scene transition animation like so. So the first thing is we need to supply it with an activity, so we're going to just pass in this. At this point it's not really ambiguous as to what this means. And then we're going to use these things called pairs. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this part in because it's just like really long and annoying to type out. But we'll talk about it. And we're going to import the pairs. So how do these things kind of work? Let's just fix that really quickly. All right, so we've got these pairs. And they receive two parameters. So one of the parameters they receive is the root view of the view that was clicked on, the things that will be sort of animating. So we're saying view root.findViewById, referring to our circle drawable, and this is within the list item layout file, item data, I believe it's called. We're saying find that view by ID. We are going to transition to a view called transition drawable in whatever thing we are transitioning to, which happens to be activity detail. So we are supplying it with that tag that we included in our strings.xml, which has been assigned in activity detail as the transition names for our objects appropriately. And these pairs will now be able to animate back and forth between each other. So that's kind of how we set that up. The only other thing we need to do is we need to call start activity, and then we can say I, but also we will say options.toBundle. And that should be it for our transition animations. As always, I've probably screwed something up, so I'm going to fire the demo up and find out which things I screwed up. And we'll do the outro at that point. But yeah, it's been fun. Well, this is unprecedented, but I fired the app up, and well, it looks like garbage. So yeah, let's make a couple changes and clean this up a little bit. All right, let's finish this off. So we've got a couple corrections to make. So first and foremost, I want to bring your attention down to, where is it? Delete list item at. I'm sure a lot of you noticed this already, but this obviously needs to be set to notify item removed. So that's the first little fix we'll make. Also, let's go ahead and actually implement the toolbar. So that's going to be private toolbar. And what we're going to do is, of course, get a hold of a hook to the XML here. Toolbar equals toolbar find view by ID, blah, blah, blah. Just like that. And then we will say toolbar.set title. And where are we here? And so for the title, we're just going to say r.string. We'll just make a new string resource, and that's going to be title toolbar. And that resource is just list activity. And then we'll also set an icon for the toolbar and a margin. So we're going to say set icon, or sorry, set logo rather. And for the logo, we're going to say r.drawable.icView list thingy. And then we're also going to set up some padding here just so our things aren't all squished together. Set title margin start to 72. All right, so that's our toolbar setup. Should work properly now. And also what we're going to do is scroll down to our view holder and fix the error from before. So we're going to go ahead and add in that progress bar, even though we're not really going to see it in action, but we'll go ahead and add it anyway. Progress bar, we'll call it loading. Just set it up here. And that's going to be pro item data. And that's all we need to do there. And then let's set up, and we need to make 2 changes in onBind view holder. So for starters, since we're not setting the background, but rather we're setting an actual drawable, we need to make a little bit of a change to our colored circle here. And also we need to make sure that this is actually cast to the right thing, which is a circle image view, not a regular view. And we can go ahead and add that in down here, like so. And we're also now going to say, I believe, set image resource is the correct one. Let me just double check on that. Set image resource. And we are going to be passing in, I could rename this at this point. This should actually say like get drawable resource or something like that. But, you know, we both know that it's just an int that points to a drawable. And that should set that up properly. And the last thing we need to do is make sure that our progress bar, our loading bar, is not visible when the RecyclerView item is in plain view. And we can fix that by saying set visibility view.invisible. All right, cool. So we've made those changes, and let's fire up the demo to see if this thing is actually working now. I see we got a little bit of red. What's going on there? Finish off that bracket. I don't need to make extra work for myself. Here we go. You would not believe how happy I am to see this. No jokes this time. We're finally functioning properly, and Ryan is very happy to see that. So that's it for this iteration of the tutorial. I'm not exactly sure where I'll go next with it, but it will probably have something to do with hooking it up to real working databases or services or things of that nature. But yeah, as we can see, we are animating, we are able to delete items and undo the deletion, and we can add items to the recycler view fairly seamlessly. It doesn't look amazing, but like the main thing I wanted to give you is a starting point with which you can improve upon in your own applications. So that's basically it. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and commit this and get that project set up. I really hope you've enjoyed the tutorial so far, and hopefully it's been informational and maybe a little bit entertaining, even just to laugh at me. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Much appreciated, and we'll see you in the next tutorial. Peace out.